All right, we're back. It is COMP1073, and we are in the winter 2017 semester. So client-side scripting at Georgian, week 2, part 2 of our broadcast. I should actually say broadcast, not recording. So I did a bunch of stuff last time, and some people weren't here. So let's try and do it again, right? I'm going to kind of do another case of how to put things together. All right, review. We're going to use Visual Studio Code. What did I do last time? How did I put things together with Visual Studio Code? What's the first thing that I start off with VS Code? First thing, I'm going to start building stuff. Pretty simple. Huh?
I was just going to say open.
I could open it, yeah, okay. But then what else? So here's it. It's open. It's kind of probably focused on empty, right? So what else do I need to do? How do I start going? Huh? What? A folder? Okay, so I need a folder, right? So last time I called it COMP1073 Winter 2017 Lesson 1. Let us make a folder here on my messy desktop. I'm going to kind of call it, all my COMP1073 lessons are going to be in here, right? So I'm going to kind of drag and drop this one in there. And inside my folder, I'll make another one. So here's a new folder called COMP1073 Winter 2017 Lesson 2. Okay. Now that I've got a folder, I can drag and drop the folder from my desktop, and this is the same for Windows and Mac, into Visual Studio Code, which gives me direct access to this folder on the operating system. So that's step 1, make a folder. Step 2, what are the 3 folders that I've asked you to make to start off this? And it's also part of your assignment. What are they? Yes.
Content.
Assets, contents,
And, scripts.
scripts. Those are the 3. Let's make those. So it's assets, right? Content. What if I do this? And script. Hold on a second. I got a problem. What do I do to fix it? How do I fix this? This is like content is in script and assets, and scripts is in content. How do I fix this problem? What do I do in Visual Studio Code? Just drag it out, right? So if you just drag it out like this, it kind of fixes itself. Otherwise, they're inside of each other, right? Okay, so I got some stuff. What do I need? Basic. What do I need to kick off a web app, right? First thing, before JavaScript, index.html. It's got to be for the web. It cannot be tom.html, okay? It's got to be index.html, index.html. For most web servers, default.html, default.html. Please use, in this course, index.html for your first page, all right? So again, I'm going to kind of start this new file, so index.html. Now, I did something funny last time. I used something called emmet, and I start typing my doc type. So here's my doc type, right? And in emmet, I had a single line of code, right, that I used, right, to kind of code out my stuff. How did I do it? I did something like this. I said, well, all HTML pages have to be surrounded with an HTML tag, right? So here's my HTML tag. And then I use the greater than sign. Greater than sign means contains, right? It contains 2 things. I'm going to put it in brackets. One is my head. And then next to it, plus means next to. Next to that, there is my body. Those are the 2 tags, right? And if I go to the end, and if I press tab, it does this, right? So short code. I'm using some short code for HTML, right? So that way I can get my HTML coded out quicker. I'm going to go a little quicker than I did last week because I've shown you this already, right? This is just review, right? So head and body, and inside my head, I'm probably going to have a title. So I can put the greater than sign again, title, right? I could do that. And maybe I even have some meta tags, which means I can probably surround these with brackets as well. So I can do something like, you know what, there's a title, there's probably a meta tag in there, right? And maybe another meta tag. They're all contained within my head, right? The head of my document, right? It's called meta tags, my head, right? My title, and then my body. Inside my body, I probably have a couple of div tags. I might have a div tag with a class of container because I'm going to use Bootstrap, right? Dot means class, right? Pound means, right? ID. Pound means ID, dot means class, right? And then if I press tab, I get this, right? So I can get this pretty quick. right? I want to undo. If you ever want to go back to the single line, just undo again, and then you get that single line of code. That's emmet for you. That's what it's called, EMMET, right? And for those people, like I said last week, who weren't here, or you didn't know where to look for the short code for the syntax, you can go to emmet, right, which is really the essential toolkit, like it says for developers. If you go to documentation and you go to syntax, you can see here that it gives you some examples of how to code. So this is going to produce this. So a lot of less coding and a lot quicker HTML structure, all right, than we talked about before. I'm going to kind of take emmet, this emmet.io, docs.emmet.io, copy it, and just drag and drop it into Slack. So here's emmet docs. Here it is. That's why I use Slack. Slack is a great communication tool. I can kind of share links with you really quickly, stuff we talk about in class and that kind of thing. So please join me on Slack if you haven't already. All right, so back to this. So here we go. We've got this line of code, and I want to add some more detail if I want to here. I want to include other things, but for now, I think we're good to start. So here's what's my starting. This is my kind of a template that I'm using. HTML5, the language is going to be English. My meta tag, the first meta tag is going to be my character set meta tag, which is going to be UTF-8, right? The stuff we covered last time. And I'm going to use the viewport meta tag. Name is equal to viewport. And then content is equal to width, equal to device-width. And then comma initial scale is equal to 1. And that's going to basically set up my meta tag for responsive design, right? I'm also, in my title, I'm going to put some kind of thing, like maybe this is going to be called COMP1073, lesson 2. Underneath my title, I'm going to put a section where there's going to be CSS, because I always put my CSS at the top of my code. So this is my CSS section. Kind of covered this last time again. And at the bottom of near the bottom of my body tag, I'm going to have my JavaScript section. This is my this is where I'm going to kind of hold this stuff off. This is all stuff that you guys should know how to do. My div container, this is where my content is going to go. And I'm going to probably have some kind of other area in my page that does navigation. So here's my navigation section. Right? It's going to be some navigation. And inside down here, there's going to be an area that has my main content. Right? Here's my main content. This is new. Stuff I didn't include last time. These are just comments, right? And then down here somewhere, I'm going to probably have my footer section. Okay, so footer, main content, navigation. I'm making a page up, right, from scratch. Clear? Nothing new or exciting here. Except we're going to use Bootstrap, right? And I don't want to go and download Bootstrap manually because that's a pain. And it's inaccurate sometimes. We make mistakes. So I'm going to use Bower to do that. In order for you to have Bower, you need to have npm installed. So for people who missed last lecture, please install Node.js, npm, of course, comes with it, and Bower. And for this, I'm going to include a new file, which is going to be called the bowerrc file, .bowerrc in code. I'm going to use curly braces in here. There's my bowerrc code. And the bowerrc config file, what it does is it tells Bower, which is the package manager for the web. So here's my package manager for the web, Bower. We covered this last week too. This is it. I'm going to put this on our link. Right, so here's our link. So Bower, link. Okay, this is it. This is Bower. It's up on Slack right now. Okay, so Bower is the package manager for the web. And we're going to use this to download jQuery, Bootstrap, Font Awesome, all the other things, all the other libraries we're going to use for our web app. Okay? That's what we're doing with Bower. But I'm setting it up here first with bowerrc. Right now it's empty in bowerrc. This is our control file, if you will. And we're going to press Control Space to kind of choose our directory for Bower, right? And we're going to change this instead of Bower component, which is the default location where Bower is going to put all of our stuff, which is ugly. I want to change this to scripts lib, right? Scripts lib. So our bowerrc file tells Bower where to put our front end frameworks. Okay, again, this is all review from last week. Everything we covered last week. Anything that I didn't cover that you see here? Anybody? Confusion? What is Bower, right? All right, this is step one. We also need a couple of other things. I'd like to also always have inside of my content some kind of file that is my app.css file. So this is where my custom JavaScript or CSS, custom CSS lives here. Okay, so this is where I keep that. And then for scripts, again, for scripts, a new file, I'm gonna kind of put in my app.js script. This is where my JavaScript lives. JavaScript lives here. Right? Because that's where I'm gonna put my JavaScript. This is where I'm gonna put my app.css. I've got my Bower. See, I'm just setting up my files right now, right? Okay, what's the next step? This is configuration. I need, right, and this is what I recommend to you, a bower.json file. Bower.json is almost like tells my application or people who come to my application, my web application, what are my dependencies? Do I need jQuery? Do I need Bootstrap? Do I need Font Awesome? Do I need these things? And the way I set that up is through the command line, right? Now, if you're afraid of the command line, this course is going to make you unafraid because we need to use the command line a lot, all right? I'm not going to use an IDE like Visual Studio. I'm not going to use an IDE like, or some kind of thing like WebStorm. We're going to do a lot more command line in this course to get you comfortable so that you get you ready for server-side scripting, because server-side scripting is going to be a lot more command line than this, right? Because we need to understand, and there's more control with command line. You learn command line and you're comfortable, you have control over your processes. Now, I also said that if you set up GitHub, you can also, if you're really afraid of command line, use the desktop GitHub app, desktop.github.com. That was from last week, remember? If you don't remember how to use GitHub, you can grab that online. I'll put that up on Slack as well. So this is the desktop GitHub app. So desktop GitHub app, which allows you to do Git a little easier if you're afraid of command line, right? But we're going to do command line in this course, so here we go, right? So one thing I need to do is open up a terminal, and there's 3 ways I can open up my terminal. I can open up the integrated terminal or command prompt inside of Visual Studio. If I go View, if I click on my Visual Studio Code and go View, I can look at integrated terminal, and it'll open up in here. That's one option. Okay, it's all built into Visual Studio Code. That's one thing I could do. All right. I could. This is my preferred method, by the way. I could right-click down here inside my solution files. Right-click, and then I can go to Open in Terminal. And if you're a Windows user, it would be Open in Command Prompt. That's also acceptable, right? Why? Because it swims right to this path. Notice that the path is users Thomas desktop COMP1073 blah blah blah. And if instead of me putting all that in and figuring all that out, it does it for me, right? So that's option 2, and I think this is the preferred option. And the other option is, if I have my folder open, I can always open my command prompt by itself. So this is in the wrong place. I can put a CD command for change directory, and then I can drag from my folder to my CD command. This is both Windows and Mac, and press Enter, which is the same thing as what I did with my my Visual Studio Code. Either way, you got to navigate there somehow, because that's how we control our web application. You have to be inside the application folder. Doesn't matter whether you're doing Node or whether you're doing JavaScript or PHP or whatever you're doing. Okay, fantastic. Now that you're in here, I want to use Bower, but I want to initialize Bower first, and I'm going to use a little wizard, right, or a batch file, which kind of kicks off Bower and creates my bower.json file. And the bower.json file, I told you it keeps track of all my dependencies for my web application, right? So we're going to go Bower init. That's the command. Again, I'm assuming that you have Bower installed at this point. If you don't, you're going to have to do an npm install Bower space -g for global, right? And again, I did that last week, but if you're really worried about it this week, and if you want to kind of continue to follow along, if you go to the Bower website, you can see that the command to install Bower is this. -g stands for global. And of course, in order for you to use npm, like we talked about last week, you need to have Node installed, Node.js. So please, if you don't have Node installed, if you're a Windows user, you can install Node.js, right? If you're a Mac user, I recommend going through Homebrew, because that's a better way to install Node for Mac users, right? And again, I kind of said that last week, but we'll talk about, installing Node, install Node.js with Homebrew. I already typed it in, actually. Look, it's right here. Mac, right? And then it kind of gives you this little article on how to do that with the Mac, right? Here it is. And I'll just drag and drop that into, VS Code, or sorry, Slack. There it is. That's another thing you can do, another link. But what if you can't get Node and Git working on your machine? Remember I talked about this last week. This is why it was installation week last week. You need to modify your environment variables with Windows machines. And modifying your environment variables with Windows machines can be complicated, right? And we did that whole exercise last week where you went in there and added Node and Git to your path in order for you to get things going. So all that is part of our video from last week. Please look to last week if you weren't here. Okay, so we're moving and grooving here. We've got our Node installed. I'm going to do a Bower init, and now I'm in the wizard. I'm going to put everything lowercase, so COMP1073, W2017. That's the name of our app, lesson 2, and press enter. My description is a demo app for lesson 2, right? My main file, I'll leave blank. Keywords, JavaScript, right? JavaScript. And then my author is me. Right? It knows who I am. My MIT license, that's fine. My home page, I don't have one right now. Yes, I'll accept that one. Yes, I'll accept that one. Yes, I'll accept that one. So yes, yes, yes. And press yes again. Right? So it's kind of accepting everything, a couple of inputs. What this does is it creates this file inside of your project. Here it is, bower.json. And basically what it does is it's kind of a manifest of your files, all the files, all the libraries we're going to install here, right, for our web app, right? We're going to install jQuery. We're going to install Bootstrap. We're going to install today Font Awesome. That's the third thing we're going to install today. And I want to do that. I don't want to go to the websites and grab everything and install it manually. That just takes too long, right? And it's inaccurate, right? I want to be able to do it all with command line, much quicker. So I'm going to go to my command line, clear the screen. It's clear for Mac and CLS for Windows. Right? And when I go here, I'm going to do the following. I'm going to say Bower install. So install is the verb that I'm going to use with Bower. Bower is the command. Install is the verb. I want to install what? jQuery. And I can specify a version, right? I don't want to use the latest version of jQuery because it's not fully compatible with Bootstrap, right? So I want to go jQuery at the @ 2.2.4, right? That's the most compatible version of jQuery. All right, and then I want to go --save. The switch --save, what it does, it says, hey, save jQuery as a dependency for my project. I need jQuery for my project to run, right? And jQuery is a JavaScript library that makes JavaScript a little easier. Okay, we're going to talk about later on in this course, actually, how to use it. Press enter. It's going to go out to the web, grab jQuery at 2.2.4, and slap it into scripts lib. That's where I told it to go with my Bower RC file. My Bower RC file, this one, it told it to go to scripts lib, and that's where it is. Here's jQuery in scripts lib. It actually put it in there. That's my library. I want to do the same thing with Bootstrap, and I want to do the same thing with Font Awesome, right? But I don't want to do it twice. I want to do it all in one line, and Bower will allow us to do that. I can do something like this: Bower install Bootstrap. And also font-awesome, right? And then --save. So kind of two things, right? And then press enter. And what that does, it gets the latest version of Bootstrap, which is a CSS front-end framework, right? A mobile-first framework, as well as Font Awesome, which is a great font icon library that we can use and incorporate into our site. For those people who don't know Font Awesome, which if it's new for you, let's take a look. Here's Font Awesome. I look for Font Awesome. Right, here it is. This guy's really selling. What it does is it includes things like some icons. If I look at the icons for Font Awesome, take a look. There's all these little icons you can include in your website, and they're just fonts. They're just text, right? So someone's gone through the process, not just here, but in other places, of getting a font, but it looks like an image. And this is much faster loading, like I said, than actually a vector graphic. It's much faster and lightweight, right? So we use Font Awesome in our images, right? We're going to do that today with our navigation. All right, let's take a look at my project. So I've included Font Awesome. This is just all the install information here on the command line. I've included Bootstrap. I've included Font Awesome. By the way, if you can't keep up with me, don't worry. I'm recording everything, right? And also, I've done that before. This is just a review of everything we did last week. I'm just doing it a little faster just to get us caught up so we can get going. All right, so let's take a look at my web app now. What do I have so far? I have jQuery, Font Awesome, and Bootstrap. They're all under scripts lib. And what I want to do now is include it in my index.html because my index.html is my manifest. It's my manifest for my entire application, right? So everything's got to be linked into my index.html, and I'm going to put it in the right places. My CSS should go up here. The first one should be my Bootstrap CSS. So it's going to be under Bootstrap, dist, CSS, and then bootstrap.min.css. This is what this is, right? So I'm going to kind of type it in. I'm going to go link, right? Inside there, I'm going to include the bootstrap.min.css and the bootstrap theme.min.css, those two. That's a little different than last week. And I can do that simply by right-clicking on the file I want, copy my path, and paste it in, right? So paste it here. And when I do that, I want to delete everything before the scripts. Notice that scripts is there, and I'm going to put the dot in there to indicate that it's going to be in the scripts folder. That's the most compatible way of doing it. Hey, now that I have a link, right, like this, okay, I have a link. I want to do that again. I want to copy this whole link, and I'm going to copy it a couple of times, give myself some space, because I want to include in here in the head, right, Bootstrap theme. I also want to have my own file, my own app.css. I want to include that. Plus, I also want to include Font Awesome, right? Those are the 3 or 4 style sheets that I want. It's not going to be the same path because this is the wrong thing, but bootstrap-theme, that's here, right? Bootstrap.theme.min.css, that's here. So that's good. How about Font Awesome? That should come next, right? So here's Font Awesome, CSS. Under there, there's a fontawesome.min.css. Copy that path. And then I can kind of replace this one, right, with that one, and get rid of everything before the scripts, because that's just local to me, right? I don't want that. That won't work with all websites, only mine, only my little computer here, right? And then the same thing goes with my local content app.css. Notice that my content's in a different place, right? So it's going to be content. I'm just going to get rid of all this. It's going to be content and then /app.css. Okay, so that's my real. I'll let you take a look at that for a second. That's the CSS section that I'm adding in, and that points to all the files within my application. And the reason why it says scripts lib is that's where I've got Bower, the front-end package manager for the web, to install stuff in those locations for me, right? So I don't have to go to the web and grab 5 things. I'd have to go to 4 websites to do all this, right? This way I just do it one place in the command line and it's done, right? Are we good with this? This is just the CSS section. Again, we've done this before. And I'm also going to share it up on GitHub in a second, right? If you don't have this. All right, so now that we've got our style, we want to add our JavaScript section. Maybe spell it right too, Tom. How about that? I need some scripts in there, right? So in my scripts, my script tag, right? Here's my script tags, right? So I've got script. I need in there a source tag, right? And my source tag has got to be the path to my scripts. And the first script I want in there is jQuery. And then after jQuery, I want Bootstrap. And then after Bootstrap, I want my own app.js. Right? So those are the 3 JavaScript libraries we need. So first, jQuery. So I'm going to go to jQuery. Again, I'm going to go into my scripts lib, go to jQuery, go to dist, distribution, and then grab this jQuery.min.js, copy it, the path, and paste it in. And then get rid of everything before the scripts folder and replace all that with a dot, which means this is a generic scripts folder. I'm going to close off this with a quotation. All right, so this is the path to jQuery. Here it is. So again, scripts, lib, jQuery, dist, and then jQuery.min.js. That's the path. I want to do the same thing with Bootstrap now. So after jQuery comes Bootstrap, right? I'm going to go into scripts, lib, Bootstrap, dist. Instead of CSS, it's got to be in JS, and then bootstrap.min.js. Copy that, and copy that into there. Paste that into here like this. Again, I'm going to get rid of everything before the scripts because that's central to me or local to me. So it's going to look like this. And then for my last one, it's just my app.js, which is my local app.js file, right? So that's going to be scripts. It won't be in script lib. It'll just be in scripts app.js, right? So that's my JavaScript side. So again, I need both parts. I need the CSS, which is my style, and the JavaScript, which is my behavior. Remember what I said? 3 things, the way things work with apps. We use progressive enhancement, right? The first part is structure, your HTML and your content. That's the first part. Second part is presentation, which is your CSS, right? And maybe a CSS framework like Bootstrap, right? And the third part is behavior, which is your JavaScript. And you want to do it in that order. If your content sucks, your entire site sucks, right? It doesn't matter how good your JavaScript is. And same thing with CSS. If your CSS is terrible and your presentation is ugly, then your site is going to be terrible even if your functionality is great, behavior-wise, right? So that's the philosophy behind it. And that came out of PowerPoint number 1 from last week. Okay, so we've got this part, right? And I have a bit of a container. I want to put in, kind of like, in here, some kind of H1 tag that kind of says something like, COMP1073, right? Lesson 2, right? Something that tells me what I'm doing here. I don't have a footer section yet or a navigation section. We're going to add that in today with Bootstrap, right? In my app.js, I also want to test out that my app.js is working. And what do I want to put there? The first command we learned last week? What's the first command we learned last week? Yes. Console.log, right? So I want to do console.log. And then inside there's something like app started, right? Now we're assuming the following thing. Our index.html, just as a review, what's happening with index.html is it goes through line by line. The browser goes through line by line, reads everything in, and then when it gets to the areas where I'm linking stuff in, it actually includes it in that particular point, right? At that point. So on line 8, it included my style sheet for Bootstrap. On line 9, it includes my style sheet from the theme for Bootstrap, another Bootstrap theme. Right? On line 10, it included font awesome. On line 11, it includes my app.css, my custom CSS. And then it keeps reading everything. I have a div tag, which is a container, right, that contains an H1 tag with a little bit of a heading, right? I got some comments, which are ignored. So all these comments in HTML are ignored, right? And then I start loading in my JavaScript. And these are libraries. jQuery is quite a big library, so I load that in, the whole jQuery library. Then I load in the whole Bootstrap library. And then I get to finally, in line 26, I finally do my own JavaScript at the end. And we do it in that order because I want to load up everything from everyone else, and then my own app.css, which is at the bottom of the CSS chain in that cascade, can control or modify all the CSS that went before. And the same thing goes with my JavaScript. It won't modify it, but maybe my JavaScript will depend on jQuery or Bootstrap, and so I put it at the bottom, right? So this is the order that I'm putting it in. Okay, one more thing. Now I've got to put this up to GitHub. In order for me to put this up on GitHub, my local Git repository must be created, right? And there's a couple ways to do that. I've shown you with command line last time. I'm going to clear the screen. And here are my Git commands, right? We have 3 of them we need to do. What's the first Git command that I need to do to set Git up? Git init. What this does is it creates an invisible folder in my application called .git, right? It's invisible. On Windows, you have to expose it. On Mac, the way you can see it is ls-al, which is a Linux command that shows you that .git is there. It's just hidden, right? That's the first command. What's the second command we have to use? I've initialized my Git repository. What's the next one? Git add. right? Git add, and what am I adding? Everything, right? So it's git add dot. Git add dot means add everything to my repository. That's what I'm going to do. It's actually a staging area. Before we get into the repository, we almost like check mark all the files that are in my project. Those are the ones that I'm going to take a snapshot of right now, right? Press enter. What's the third one? I'm going to go to you again because you're the one last. What's the third command that we use? So we get init, git add dot, and then
Git commit and first.
git commit. Git commit. The commit we call a commit. So git commit. A commit is a snapshot, a picture, if you will, of the current state of my files, right? But we need to attach a message to it, a little message that tells me what this thing is. And we're going to put the -m switch in there. And we're going to usually call it either first commit or initial commit. Those are the two things. And then press enter. Okay, we've done the first three things. I need to do two more things. I need to add a remote, and I need to push from my local GitHub to my remote. But I need to know where I'm pushing to, right? And the way I get that is GitHub. So I'm going to go to GitHub. And in GitHub, I have a little organization for you guys called Georgian College, right? It's a little organization. And then I can create a new repository here. By the way, for if you don't have that link to my files, I'll put that on Slack as well. So GitHub link. Right, so Georgian College, there it is. So you can actually access GitHub from there. And then I'm going to click New. And when I click New, I'm going to add a new repository with the name of my file. In this case, 1073, COMP1073, W2017, lesson 2. And then press enter. And when I do that, GitHub gives me some instructions. And they're the exact same instructions that I got last time. I did git init, I did a git add. Instead of a git add readme, I did a git add dot. And then instead of a first commit, I just called it initial commit. First commit or initial commit, they're both fine, right? And then these last two lines, this is how I add my remote. And a remote is just a link to a cloud provider somewhere. And there's a couple of them that we like to use. One is GitHub, and one is Bitbucket. Those are the two big ones that we use, right? I'm using GitHub. That's my common practice, but you could certainly use Bitbucket if you want to. As long as I get a link to that, I don't care on your assignment, right? Then I'm going to take these two lines, the last two lines, copy them, go back to my command prompts. Let me clear this thing, or my terminal, and paste them, and then press enter. And what this is going to do is going to take my files locally and push them to GitHub, the cloud service. Now, it may ask you to log in for the first time, right? If you've never done this before, it may ask you to log in. And to prevent logging in all the time, and I'm going to just refresh here so you can see that my files are up on GitHub now. To prevent logging in every single time, you want to do something called a git. You want to config your credentials, right? And there's a bit of a credential helper for Microsoft, right? It tells you how to do that right here. It tells you how to put in things like your, how to use the credential helper to add things in. And you also want to use git config to configure your email and your name and all that kind of stuff. And the way to do that, if you go git config, I look at that. Here's my git config documentation. You can see that these are all the things that I can do with git config, right? I can configure my name. I can configure all kinds of stuff. But the most important part is your, and by the way, git first time setup. If you go there as well, maybe I'll put this link on Slack for you guys. But these are really important to do, these two lines here, right? Git config -- global username, whatever your username is, and git config -- global the link to GitHub, your email, right? So I'm just going to put that in here. I'm just going to kind of take this getting started, first time git setup, right? And I'll put that up on Slack. So first time git setup. There we go. Now I'm sharing this with you so that way it makes it easier for you to set things up. There is a bit of setup for this course, but once we're set up, after the first 2 weeks, we should be golden. And please see the videos. All right, I can't reteach or go over that again and again, over and over again. It's kind of a waste of time for everybody, but it's also good review for the second week, and that's why I'm doing it. Okay, so we've done that part. We've put it up on GitHub, and if you could not go as fast as me, please go up on GitHub and download my files. You can just click here on download, right? That's one way to do it. Or you can also fork me on GitHub. What forking does is makes a copy of my repository in your repository, right? So you have a copy. You can always go in there and download my files. Okay, so that's GitHub, and I've got my stuff in there, but we're not quite done. Let's test what we've got so far, right? And how do we test? Remember I talked about a little server that I set up last week called light-server, light server, right? And what I've got in here, I've got to be in my home directory. So, in the directory of my project. So I'm going to just do a clear, right? And in the directory of my folder, I'm going to do light-server. And what light server does, again, it's an npm module that you can download and install. Let me show you what that is. So light-server npm. What it is a little node server that we set up really quickly. This is where it is, light server, and this is how you install it, right? You can do it locally for each project with --save -dev, or you can do it globally like I've done, right, for all of my console applications. And what this does, light server, it creates a little server for me to test my applications, which is more realistic. Yes?
Is this what you want us to use for the final or for the summit?
No. Your assignment should be live somewhere on Azure. This is just for local testing. All right, so the question was, should I use this as my final assignment? No, this is just a local server that I'm using for testing. You should be linked into something like, DreamHost or Microsoft Azure. Those are the two options that we have, and there's others you can find, whatever works for you. All right, so I've got this COMP1073 lesson 2, but there's nothing much in here. I want to add a navigation bar. I want to add Font Awesome. I want to set up my web app, really make it look really, really nice, right? And this is part of assignment number 1 for you, right? Is how do I kind of set up my stuff for the first time from scratch, right? So I'm going to direct you back to Bootstrap, bootstrap.com. I'll put that up on Slack for you guys. So Bootstrap link. There it is, there's Bootstrap, right? So you click there, that'll take you to Bootstrap. And what Bootstrap does is it is a front-end CSS framework that makes us look like superheroes. Even though we may be terrible at CSS, this is not a CSS course, right? So I'm going to allow you to use Bootstrap to kind of get going, moving on style, right? And positioning, that's what this allows us to do. It uses something called a 12-column grid, right? So it breaks up your web page into 12 columns, each around 8%. I want you to think of it like this, right? So if you add everything up, it's roughly 100%, right? 8.3% or something like that. And what it allows us to do is position everything by columns as opposed to by pixels or something like that, right? We don't want to do that. We want to make it responsive. With we use %, our website or elements in our website will be positioned dynamically. So if I change the width of my viewport, my elements will grow or shrink according to how I've set things up with Bootstrap. Bootstrap has a couple of areas that I want you to look at. One is getting started. You can look at that. But CSS, it actually talks about how to install things like, buttons. Here's an example of some buttons in Bootstrap and how to do a button in Bootstrap. And it gives you some classes that are pre-built for us. We can do buttons. We can also do things like forms in Bootstrap here and a bunch of other things. We also have another thing that we have, talks also about the grid system. And this is a great place to learn the grid system with Bootstrap because we're using a 12-column grid. They have some options here on how to do that. Example would be with this. We have one of our classes is column dash middle, so middle size column or medium size column, 1. That means there's only one column, roughly medium size, this. Here's a column dash medium dash 8, so 8 columns wide. So I can have an element that takes 8 columns of space on my website. So we use a 12-column grid for this. And here are some examples of how to include a row. We need to include a class of row, right, with a bunch of columns in there. And for each row, we can do 12 columns, 8 and 4, 3 times 4, 2 times 6, but somehow it's got to equate to 12 at the end of each row. Every row has to have at least 12 columns somehow allocated. All right, that's one thing we need to know. So if I go back to my container, going back to this, I know I have Bootstrap enabled because I already have class of a container. I need to add another one. I'm going to put div, right, with the class of row, right? And inside that, I want to have a div, right, with the class of column-medium, right? And then I want to have at least, for my title, let's say 6 columns. And I want to have 3 columns on the left side as a, as margin. 3 columns left side, 6 columns in the middle, 3 columns on the right side. Let's just see if I can do that, right? And to do my columns for the actual object, this thing here, right? It's 6. That's the class. But I also want to have an offset from the left of 3. So I'm going to say column-medium-offset-3. Those 2 classes. This is my short code, right? This is Emmet. And if I press tab, it does this. And I want to take this, I want to cut it, and I'm going to put it inside here. So this is my final form. So again, my container is the overall container. It's actually the margin for my box, right? And usually it gives me quite a bit of margin in my container. If I don't want any margin, I can use something called container fluid when I use Bootstrap. And container fluid gives me very little margin on the right and left, right? And I'll show you the difference in a second, right? My row, for every row of data, anything that I want to store in terms of inside my my box model, right? I want to have whatever container I want. Right now I only have an H1 tag that takes up 6 columns, right? And has an offset from the left, starting from the left, of 3 columns. So there's 3 column margin plus a 6 column space for my container. This is pretty big, and I may not need that much. Let's take a look. So if I save it, because I'm using Light Server, right? Light-server, I have something called, right, automatic updates, right? I have browser links set up, so it's kind of centered, not really, but kind of, right? And if you look at it, if I actually kind of change the size of the width of my page, so too my title moves around in this kind of so-called responsive design layout. Okay? So this is COMP1073 lesson 2. I want to include other elements really quickly. I want to have a nav bar and a footer. Well, Bootstrap has all those things. Let's just get the Bootstrap stuff going. So I'm going to go to Bootstrap. I'm going to scroll all the way out of the top, right? And instead of going to CSS this time for nav bar and those kind of things, I want to go to components. And under components, I can see that on the right, I have other things in here, like nav bars. Here's nav bars. And they also give you some examples of nav bars you can include on your website. Here's a nav bar, right, with a bunch of stuff, links and blah, 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 and all kinds of other stuff. I don't need all this, right? I don't need all of this. This is a big nav bar that they've kind of selected, right? But I want some of it. So for now, I'm just going to copy this whole thing and then delete some of the stuff that I don't need. Let's copy it. So copy. We're going to go back to Visual Studio Code, right? And underneath the navbar section, right, make some space, and then paste. Woof, lots of stuff there. I don't need it all, though. Let's go through it, right? First of all, notice it uses a container fluid, right? Container fluid gives you less margin on the right and left. So that means a navbar is going to take up the whole size of my website, right, my whole page, right? Next, my navbar default is the color and the styling of my navbar, right? If I want to make it dark, I can make it navbar-inverse, right? Navbar-inverse makes it dark, okay? Okay, cool. Now I'm going to go down a little bit. I have my toggle collapsed. This is a collapsible area here. And I have these 3 things on line 21, 22, and 23. These icon bars is the hamburger. You know, the little hamburger that comes up, 3 lines that come up on a website? That's what this is. And I use these icon bars with borders to draw a little hamburger, little lines on my website on the top right corner. When it's smushed up, when I don't have enough room to display my whole navbar, and I go like this, I kind of reduce the size of my navbar, then only the hamburger shows up, not the entire navbar. Okay? Next, I have a brand. This is where your logo is going to go. So I'm going to just put that logo goes here. Logo goes here. This is where the logo goes, right? And notice it says navbar brand, right? I can also link it to my home page by just, typing in there, index.html. Right? Because that's what this thing is going. If you click on your logo, it's going to go back to your page, right? Okay, now this is where it gets funky, right? I have a bunch of other stuff in here, and I have things like a drop-down list. Here's a drop-down list. I don't need a drop-down list. And this kind of goes all the way from here till about here. So I can get rid of all this. So no drop-down list. Bye-bye. Right? Now this is underneath, if you notice, right? This is underneath my collapse. There's line 28 here on my side. You have your div class collapse, navbar collapse. And underneath that, you have your navbar nav. And then you have your two links, two list items, right? And then you have the end of your UL. Okay, then you have a bunch of other stuff over here. Get rid of it all. All this form stuff, all the way down to where it says this UL right here. So all this, the form and the UL is gone. I don't need any of that stuff. So now I'm left with this. This is my nav bar right here. And I'll kind of see if I can make this a little smaller for you to see it. All right, there we go. So this is what my nav bar looks like now. Right, now I have a problem. I only have two links, and one of them is set to active. That means it's going to be darker than the other ones. I have a link, right? And what I want to do is I'm going to get rid of this span. I don't care about the span tag. There we go. Okay. And I have a link without a span tag, with this one. So there's this one, which is home. And there's this one here. We'll make it, kind of, how about this? I'll make it just like, so I can set you up for your assignment number 1. The first one is going to be your home page or your bio page, right? Then you're going to have some kind of contact page, right? Contact me. And you're probably going to have a projects page, right? Which I'll probably put before that. So this is your projects page right here. So this is how I would start off my portfolio set. By the way, I'm telling you to start early, right? I need some links for these, right? I don't have these pages yet. So this one should go to my home page, so index.html. This one should go to my projects page, which I'm going to call projects.html. Now, if you're someone who wants to do a single page application, you point it to another section of your website, right? And this one would be contacts or contact.html, right? So I have those three things. So an index, a projects, and a contact me page. The only thing I don't like, right? And if I save this thing, and if I go back to my page to see it, it looks like this. Here's my logo. Here's my little nav bar. If I click on projects, it's going to fail. There's nothing there. Same thing with contact me. That fails. Nothing there, right? But it's kind of scrunched up over on the left. And I want to put these over here, right? And I can do that by changing under where the UL class is, under line 30, where it says navbar nav. This is just classes. These are style classes that I'm going to change. I'm going to go navbar right. And what this is going to do is going to push all my navigation towards the right. So that's really my navbar in a nutshell, right? It's responsive. And what that means is it uses Bootstrap classes so that if I collapse my page or if I have a smaller viewport, it's going to turn into the hamburger, right? What does that mean? Notice that it's on the right now. If I make this smaller, there's going to be a breakpoint where my page is going to turn, my nav is going to turn into this, right? When I click this, I have a bit of navigation. So that's the Bootstrap part of it. So it makes it a mobile-first design. Right, so as I move out and my breakpoint changes, it goes back to my navigation. That's what it does. Now, if you're not happy with your navigation bar and you like it to be darker or a different theme, you can certainly change your CSS yourself to modify this, or you can use a built-in dark theme called, at the top on line 15, you can go navbar inverse. And if I did that, and if I go back, so navbar inverse, I can see now that I got a dark theme for my navbar. Nothing exciting, okay? I'm just talking about navigation here. Functionality is what I'm hitting right now, right? That's why I'm telling you, you have to build on this. Even if I was to give you this, you have to build on this to make your own website, your own bio. It takes time to do all this stuff, right? So if I click on, notice that home is set to active. And if I click projects, it goes away because I don't have a projects page. Okay. Now I need a footer bar, if you will. I have my, here's how it's broken out. Here's my navigation section right here, right? Here's my main content. And then my footer section is empty. Let me upload to GitHub for those people who weren't able to keep along with me so you can get that code that I have to compare my code with yours. And Visual Studio Code has some Git functionality integrated into it. Or I could do it by command line. Today I'll do it with command line. Next time I'll go right into my GitHub integration and I can do it right through Visual Studio Code. Okay, so I got to stop my server for a second and I'm going to clear the screen. I'm going to go git, right?
What was the command for stop?
Control C. Git add dot, which is going to add everything to my new snapshot. I'm making a new snapshot now, right? Here's my second thing, git commit, and I'm going to make another commit for snapshot with a new message, which is going to say added navigation. That's what I did. Right? And press enter. I added one file. I did 29 insertions and one deletion. A couple of things I did to I changed my index.html basically, right? And I'm going to push it to GitHub. So the command to push to GitHub is git push origin, which is the remote that I'm going to, so that's GitHub, and to the master branch. Now you don't have to remember all this, right? I'm showing you command line, but there's other options. You can always go through your desktop app. You can always go through Visual Studio Code. Once you set it up the first time, Visual Studio Code allows you to do it automatically for you. Okay, so now it's uploading. And if I go to GitHub, so I go back to GitHub here, you can see that GitHub is now updated with 2 commits, right? The first one was my initial commit, and then when I added navigation. So this is how you work with GitHub and Git. As I work, as I add a feature, I upload to Git to keep track of my changes on my application. That's how we work, because if I don't keep track of my changes and something breaks, right? If I just upload once, if I just do my application and I just put it up to Git one time, you know, what if it breaks? What if something I did, it worked just now, but now it doesn't? Here I can compare. I can say, what did I do differently between one commit and another? And if you go into your commits for a second, and if you click on added navigation, you can see in green all the changes that I did, right? And in red, anything that I deleted or moved, right? That's what Git does. It compares from one snapshot to the next, right? Which is a very handy thing to have. Okay, cool. So I've got my app, right? Before we stop for a short break, because we need to do that soon too, right? I want to add my footer bar. My footer bar is empty, right? And I want to add it in, and I want to make it a sticky footer. So no matter what I do, it sticks at the bottom of my page, right? Now there is a little bit of code for this, right? And if I go up on GitHub, on Bootstrap, sorry, here's my Bootstrap. And if I look at nav, there's navs, right? There's buttons, there's drop downs, there's everything you need here if you think about it. And if I keep scrolling down, anything I need is on this page. It tells me how to put in progress bars. It tells me how to put in list groups, panels, all kinds of stuff, wells. And again, this is the version 3.7 of Bootstrap. We're going to version 4 very soon. But navs is what I want to really do. A nav or some kind of bar, you know, some kind of bar or something like that. Do we see anything that matches that? So I'm going to see navs. If I look down at tabs and pills, and there's also justified, disabled links, using drop downs, pills with drop downs, here's my nav bar, and underneath that I might have a brand image and forms and buttons and non-nav links and fixed to top. There's one. How about fixed to bottom? There's the other one. And it gives us also a piece of CSS that we have to put in at the same time for it to work properly. So fixed to bottom under navbar, I'm going to take this whole thing, copy it from here, go back to Visual Studio Code, fix the bottom, and plunk it in here, right? Here it is. So navbar default, navbar fixed bottom, and nav in a class of container. And inside of here, I'm going to put in something like an I don't know, 2 tag with and copy So copyright 2017, all rights reserved. Or something else you can put in there, like the company name, if you want. Maybe COMP1073, all rights reserved. How about that? All right, so I've just put in a little nav bar, and I want to make it sticky. Well, my problem is I need a little bit of CSS, because if you go back to the API documentation, the application programming interface for Bootstrap, that's what it is, the documentation for Bootstrap tells you you need some body padding, right? Otherwise, this won't work properly, this effect that I'm trying to make, right? I need to put this at the bottom. Padding bottom must be about 70 or 80 pixels at the bottom of your page. So I can add that in as a custom piece of CSS, right, in my app.css. So I go back to my Visual Studio Code, go to my solution, look at my app.css, which is now empty, and put in that piece of code, which is body. My body tag is going to have a padding bottom of 70 pixels. May not be enough. We'll see how it goes. Okay, there it is. That's my app.css. I've changed my app.css to add a padding bottom of 70 pixels. All right. Let's run my little server to see what it does. So I'm going to go light-server, which is going to kick off my server, and there it is. All rights reserved on the bottom. If I want this centered, that's a different story. I can center it, right? I can do a lot of different things here. I can add columns. I can do everything that we normally do, right? But for now, notice that this is my default, right? And I can't see anything, but no matter what I do, it's always at the bottom of my page. So here's my bottom of my page. It's pretty big. You know, it's pretty big and clunky, H2. I may want to use something smaller, right, than an H2, maybe an H3 or an H4. Semantically, right, it's not the main header, the main headline, so it doesn't make sense for it to be an H1 or an H2, right? So I go back and change it. So I go back to my index.html, and where I have my H1 or H2, let's make it an H4. And if I go back, you can see instantly it's changed. Smaller bit of code here, right? Again, you can put whatever you want down on the footer bar. I've just put something nice and easy. Okay, before we stop, I want to include a few icons with Font Awesome, right? First, I'm going to do a commit through Visual Studio Code, right? Notice on the left, there's a bit of a GitHub integration here, this little tool here. If I click onto it, it shows me the changes. I have a change to index.html. It looks like there's an M here. M means modified, right? And I have two files. If I click on the two with a plus, these become staged changes. Notice I went from changes to stage changes. This is like doing git add dot. That's what this is doing, okay? Now here's my commit message or my snapshot message. And I'm going to say added footer. And I can, if I really want to be really descriptive, sticky footer, which is what I've done, because it sticks to the bottom of my screen, right? And then I click the check mark. Again, this is all done without command line now, right? Okay, I've got my little commit. Now I want to push my commit, my little snapshot, up to GitHub. And I can do that by clicking the ellipses and going to push. And what this is going to do is it's going to take my files and push them to GitHub through my tool. So I don't have to do command line at all, right? This is okay too, right? If you don't like command line, you just have to set up Git for the first time. And then afterwards, you can do everything through your tool. All right, let's take a look about GitHub. I want to make sure that it all went there properly. So I'll go to GitHub and I refresh, and I should have 3 commits, right? My first one is initial commit. My second one is my added navigation. Then I added a sticky footer. And notice that I'm developing and using GitHub as I go. I'm not just using GitHub one time. I keep going with GitHub. Questions so far? Okay, one last thing. Font Awesome. I want to prove to you that Font Awesome is actually awesome to use. It looks nice, right? So what can you do with that? So I'm going to go to my Font Awesome website. I got a lot of little links up here, which I'm going to go to. But the one I want now is Font Awesome, right? So I want to go to Font-Awesome. And I can look at icons, right, by clicking on icons up here. I can look at icons, and I want to look at the home icon. Is there one? Yes, that's what it's going to look like, right? And it gives you examples of different icon sizes, right? So there's different size classes, right? So this is the line. Look, it gives you the line of code that you need to put into your HTML right here. It's an I tag with a class of FA home, right? And aria hidden is equal to true for accessibility reasons. So I'm going to take this, copy it. I'm going to go back to Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to put it inside of my navigation next to my anchor tag for the home link, which is right here. So before my home description, there's my text. So I'm going to go make this a little bit larger so you can see it. So next to this, inside my anchor tag, I'm going to kind of paste that in, right? You can also make this 2 lines if you want, right? But it looks like this. This is the big line right here. And remember, I'm also using a class of active to tell the page that this is the active link, right? And if you really don't want to use like accessibility, you can take it out so you can see it. I'm just taking it out from a visibility perspective, right? And I can add a space in here between the home and the icon. Otherwise, the icon and the home text is going to be right next to each other, right? We don't want that. Okay, now that I have this I tag right here with a space, I can copy it, and I want to put it in my projects, and I also want to put it on my contact me page, my contact me link, right? But it can't be the same home link. So I got to think what works for projects. Maybe some kind of gear, you know, or something else, and I can search for that. So I can go back. I can search for some kind of gear, right? Like a cog. If I look at project, that might be something to put too, like a lock. That doesn't make any sense. Or maybe a map of stuff that I have. So this might be okay for a map, right? Or maybe this, map signs, right? Something that makes sense to look kind of cool with your project. It has to make sense for you, right? I'll use map signs for my projects. And I'm going to get this little code, which is FA map signs. FA map signs, map dash signs, right? Right? And the other one that I want is contact. Well, that's easy. That's kind of be like a phone or something, right? Contact. Right? You can see that there is nothing. If I go phone, right? There's my contact. I can also go email if you feel like it. Some kind of envelope, right? Whatever you feel like putting in there, right? I'm going to use a phone. An old style phone too. This one. You can also use mobile if you're so inclined. That might look a little neater, right? So FA mobile, right, is the way to do it. Hey, buddy. FA mobile, right? That's giving you your font awesome here in your setup, right? If I go back to my page, now it looks like this. I have a home button, a projects button, and a contact me button, but they're a little small, right? Almost too small to see. And if you want to make it larger for my old eyes, right, and for yours maybe too, you can add in a modifier, right? And Font Awesome has some really great examples for font sizes and stuff like that as well. Basic icons. You can do larger icons with FA large, FA 2x, FA 3x. You can make it grow, right? As well as some fixed width icons. Some other options you can put in, even things like list icons, different kinds of list icons, animated icons that you can use that can be interesting for your site. All kinds of stuff that you can add in to make your site a little bit more interesting, right? As opposed to boring. Right? You don't want a boring site. This is your mini portfolio site you're going to be putting together. And when you get into Rich's class in server-side scripting, you're going to probably do it a little bit differently with Node.js, right? So you're going to, whatever you learn here is nothing that you can't reuse a little bit as we go forward into the program, right? So let's try and put in an icon that makes sense. Maybe FA, and again, it probably is not large enough. Maybe FA 2x might be the right size, right? Again, it's up to you how it looks, but my recommendation is those icons by standard are too small. So again, I would go in there and add another little size class, so FA-2x. I'm going to kind of copy that across all of my code. So there, and there. Okay. When I go back, because I've got light server going, it's instant. Okay. Home, projects, and contact me. I think it's a great place to pause before we get into the JavaScript side of the house. Questions around this? I'm going to put this up on GitHub for you if you missed something, if I went too fast. And remember, we're also recording live, right? So if you have any questions, you can always go and look at the video or send me a Slack message, right? After this, we're going to do a little bit of JavaScript again, get you guy into the flow of how do I put stuff onto a page, you know, some data onto a page from JavaScript, and what are JavaScript variables anyway? Okay, so we're going to do that. So again, before I stop, I'm going to go back to my Visual Studio Code. And inside the tool, I'm going to go to my GitHub integration tool, right? Notice that my changes were to index.html. I'm going to click on my plus button to stage the changes. And then I'm going to say my commit message, which is added font awesome, right? Icons. That's what I did. And then click the check mark over here, right? Which is commits the changes. And then my ellipses allows me to push it to GitHub. So everything inside the tool as opposed to going in command line. Right? Now, again, I can do it in both ways. And for me, I find it comfortable doing both. You need to find your middle ground. You need to find what makes sense for you in this course. Right? Remember, we're going to do GitHub in this course, in the next course, right, which is Intro to Web. We're going to do it in server-side, scripting. We're going to do it everywhere because GitHub and Git in general, the whole idea behind revision control and everything is really important, right? Okay, let's stop the recording right now, and when we come back, JavaScript.